Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, deathslays, hearse peasants, vassals, minions. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And today we're going to talk about Russia. And an article came out recently, and it echoed my exact feelings, and kind of gave me the inspiration to do this video. And the whole premise is that there will be no U.S.-Russia war anytime in the near future, because the world is dominated by Crony capitalism now, and the Russians are in on it. And I'll take that a step further, because I've always said that about China as well. The idea that there's going to be a war seems a lot more remote in this globalized world. And there's a lot of precedents for this fickle relationship between governments and corporations, and the whole idea of war. During World War I, of course, we had banks playing both sides, and in the Russian Revolution that followed, the Rockefellers and Standard Oil got involved with financing the Bolsheviks, which seems rather odd considering they're considered the nemesis of the ultra-capitalists at Standard Oil and the Rockefellers. And during World War II, of course, we had a lot of fickle relationships. United States corporations involved in financing the rise of Nazism, and also helping to finance the Nazi war machine, as well as helping get involved in making sure that certain German industrials were not bombed during the war. And in our modern time, we see the complexity of these kind of relationships as well. The fact that in almost every respect other than oil, Saudi Arabia would be an enemy of the United States. And then we have very complex relationships with countries like Israel and Pakistan as well. And this is a timely topic right now too, because we keep hearing all this rhetoric, Cold War rhetoric, and all this World War III talk, and it just seems to be a little melodramatic. And we can also look at some of the events that are unfolding right now. Before I get into exactly this U.S. corporate involvement in Russia, so first of all, one conclusive piece of evidence we have that Russia, and Putin specifically, is involved in crony capitalism is a list that Bert sent to me, and also did a video about the 50 richest politicians in the world. And the top one on the list is Vladimir Putin, estimated worth of $70 billion. And I just find it hard to believe that anybody other than a crony capitalist could get $70 billion amassed. But of course, all of these oligarchs in Russia and all over in Eastern Europe, and we're seeing that in Ukraine as well, they got wealthy quick, being insiders when there was a massive wave of privatization of former state assets when the Soviet Union was dismantled. So here we have Vladimir Putin at the top of the game, and we have these sanctions as well. And the sanctions can't get too tough, because the United States and Russia are both basically playing the same game, and mostly the leaders are posturing for their constituents, because otherwise they'll be called weak. And, so Putin certainly didn't come across as weak, and Obama has, at least for the propaganda game. Other than that, they're both just playing their game. But as this article points out, the Russians, there's no longer a philosophical game that we're playing with the Soviet Union, this game that we play with Russia, because they're no longer those commie bastards. They are crony capitalists as well, and that's the road that China is going down as well. And we're also living in this world of globalization, and that's changed things. That's changed the quotient, because economies and banks and institutions and corporations are intertwined on a global scale to a degree like nothing we've seen before, getting to the point where it's fully integrated. And that's why world corporate governance seems like an inevitability, because these corporations have permeated the globe with these mega brands. And so And then also we have the fact that economic battlefield is the battlefield. The seeds of it were developed in the 20th century, but it's being perfected in the 21st century. No longer occupying armies. We only need to control the monetary systems and the economies and the resources of countries all over the world. And then we have cyber warfare, of course. And so present and future markets and resources and infrastructure need to be protected. So that's what happens when you live in a world of transnational corporations. They're thinking of present and future markets, resources, and infrastructures. That's another reason why I think we're going to probably wind down and see these local, regional conflicts and these showdowns, these mega military showdowns, could very well be a thing of the past. Although I will acknowledge that, of course, the military-industrial complex globally is a total cash cow. So they want to maintain the fear, but in some respects, it's probably just as well that a lot of the equipment is never even used. That's an even better deal. But then we also have the fact that, of course, wars can create huge markets of their own. Look at the fact that the United States had a huge windfall after World War II, helping to rebuild a devastated globe, being the only standing industrial power. And so in that sense, certainly wars can create their own markets. But let's get back to what's going on in Russia. So what do we have going on in Russia that has this affinity with the United States and our corporate interests are so intertwined? Well, these are just a handful of some of the major corporations that operate in Russia. These names will be familiar: John Deere, Cisco, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Mars Incorporated, McDonald's, Caterpillar, IBM, Microsoft, Procter & Gamble, ExxonMobil, Boeing, Chevron, ConocoPhillips. And of course, what would a corporate party in Russia be without all the big banks? Morgan Stanley's there, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, all the big Euro banks like Deutsche Bank, and then we have Russian branches of AIG, Russian branches of UBS, and so it goes. And to look a little closer, some of these mega players, well, we have Pepsi, and in 2012 they had $5 billion in net revenue in Russia, 7% of their total global revenue, so a pretty sizable chunk of their business, and they're even buying up Russian firms, including Russia's leading dairy producer. Coca-Cola is a giant. We can only imagine what kind of the presence they must have in Russia. I assume huge, because Coca-Cola is such a brand, a mega brand. But unfortunately, there's no figures available, and that tells a story in itself. Then we have ExxonMobil, and they have a huge presence in Russia. They partnered with Rosneft, the state-owned Russian company, in 2011 to drill in the Arctic. And between 2000 and 2011, ExxonMobil's invested $10 billion in Russian operations. So supposedly we're in these adversarial positions where we're helping Russia develop their oil industry, which certainly seems like it would come in handy during wartime. And then we have General Motors. They only sold 260,000 autos in Russia in 2013, 3% of the global sales, but that's balanced out by the fact that they have multiple production facilities in Russia and invested over $1 billion in Russia in the last 5 years, which I'm sure a lot more than they've invested in the U.S. And incidentally, Russia is the leading market for European cars. Renault is the #1 auto seller in Russia. So there's a interesting part of the relationship where it gets complex. I mean, how can a war erupt? Certainly when Russia is supplying all the energy for all of Europe and Eastern Europe, has these complex relationships. And then, interestingly enough, Morgan Stanley is selling its oil trading business to Russia, that same Russian company, Rosneft. And the deal's been approved, but it hasn't gone through. But there's a substantial portion of American oil infrastructure that's going to be going to a state-owned Russian company, and that deal in jeopardy right now. But the U.S. has invested only about $10 billion in Russia, and so Russia and the United States have kept their independence. You don't really need that much from each other. The U.S. is the 20th largest trading partner for Russia, and U.S. and Russia only did $30 billion in business in 2013, so chump change in the grand scheme of things, but still, this is a developing market. Russia's known to have a developing middle class now, and of course it will be a new market. And Russia wants to be part of the global capitalist system, and they particularly want to be part of the crony capitalist system. And that's what this gets down to, the bottom line. Oh, I want to one more big bank I want to talk about, Goldman Sachs specifically. They've been in Russia, but I was surprised to find out that Goldman Sachs has been in Russia since the 70s. They opened their first office in Moscow in 1973. So during the Vietnam War, Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, J.P. Morgan opened there in 1998. It was Goldman Sachs opened there in 1998. It was J.P. Morgan that opened their first office there in 1973. So during the Vietnam War, during the good chunk of the Cold War, and little hot wars all over the world, J.P. Morgan was helping Russia with their banking. So that's kind of an interesting tidbit. But and then one of the other parts of this, we know we have a world of intertwined, this advanced globalization. We have Russian companies now that are transnational. So the United States is not the only country, and the Eurozone is not the only place that has transnational corporations whose interests serve globally. So one understands that corporations run governments and run the world, and it makes sense that their foreign policy would be directed in a way that's advantageous to them. And having markets destroyed, and having infrastructure destroyed, and having your own businesses destroyed globally is not a good way to go about that. And the bottom line to me, what this talks about is that we live in a world now where sovereignty is breaking down, and whether we like it or not, there is a class war, and the people at the top, the corporatists, the elites, the top class, the globalists, they have more of an affinity with each other. It reminds me of the monarchs of old Europe, who intermarried in families all across Europe, and they had more of an affinity with each other as classes than they did with the peasants of their own countries and their own nationalities. And we find that again with these elitists and these globalists who have more affinity to their own corporate class than to any one country, and certainly to the peasants, who are merely a demographic and a consumer class, useless eaters, as Henry Kissinger refers to them. So no more national loyalty. So I think that plays into it as well. And Russia certainly is part of that. And that's one part, the human quotient, one has to add to this. The elites being made of the same character worldwide. They have their own interests. Right now, they'd like to squirrel their wealth away and not really serve their countries. And they want to be part of the crony capitalist system. That's what the oligarchs in Ukraine want. That's what the oligarchs in Russia want. That's what the oligarchs in the United States want. And incidentally, that's what the oligarchs in China want as well. Just as a footnote, there's some graft investigations going on in China, and they were warned by the ex-president to be careful because they could run into the special interests of old party elders. So that's a familiar story, isn't it? So I don't think I put forth this proposition, but once again, I caveat it with that we have sociopaths and psychopaths running most of the countries in the world, and events have a way of taking a life unto themselves. So I never want to rule out conflict, but to me it doesn't seem like we're going to have a World War III scenario. We're not going to have U.S. is not going to have a war with Russia. We're not going to have a war with China. It's going to be about basically isolating China and Russia and encircling them, as is happening right now. The move to Ukraine is a huge pivot point there, and then the moves in Asia and the pivot to Asia is another component of that, and I see this continuing. And at some point, it's going to be like a bickering couple. They're not even going to remember why they were mad at each other as everybody joins in a giant global orgy of crony capitalism. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.